Välkommen till Aktiespararna och Småbolagsdagarna som hålls här i Stockholm. Idag är det den 13 juni 2023 och vi kommer nu att få lyssna till Bioinvent och lära känna bolaget ytterligare och inte minst dess väg framåt. Och jag hälsar Martin Welschof välkommen. Please, the floor is yours. Very welcome.
Thank you very much, Peter. And welcome everybody. And I will try to provide you with a short summary of Bioinvent in the 15 minutes that I have. You obviously will know that we are listed in Stockholm. And I would like to start with a quick snapshot of the company. So we at Bioinvent, we are translating cancer biology and immunology and new treatments for cancer, mostly solid cancer actually. And we have a broad portfolio. We currently have 5 programs in clinical development, soon 6. And they are all generated in-house, so the company is relatively integrated. So we have a research platform that provides new targets and obviously antibodies, which is our compound. And then we also have manufacturing capabilities, so we have up to 1,000 liter GMP. And then we do clinical development all under one roof. And that, of course, provides us with a significant competitive advantage, which means we can translate quickly from the discovery stage into the clinical development stage. And that is actually illustrated by the fact, so in 2018, we had 1 program in the clinic. By second half of this year, we'll have 6 programs in the clinic, so a broad portfolio, basically. The platform that I will explain to you on one of the next slides has been validated, so we have done a number of collaborations, as you can see here on this slide. Last summer, we made a deal with Exelixis, company in the San Francisco Bay Area. But we also have antibodies in development with Daiichi, Takeda, Mitsubishi, and Bayer, as you can see on this slide. Even though we are listed in Stockholm, so we have a quite large international shareholder base, and you see the names here on this slide. Redmile is our largest shareholder, followed by Van Herk, I think probably well known to you because they're quite active in the Nordics. But then also Forbion, HPM, Invus, and then a couple of good Nordic names as is AP4, Swedbank Robur, and Handelsbanken. And then we also, last summer, we got a new investor, which is AXA, and that is, I think, a very good portfolio of investors supporting the company on the long run. We were quite active in fundraising during last year and the 2 years before, which means we have a good cash position. We currently have roughly $150 million on our bank account. And that provides us with a long runway. That means until the end of 2025, based on current planning. Just to give you a little bit more background, so you might know that so-called checkpoint inhibitors have become the standard of care. The main product there is Keytruda from Merck. And they work very well, but just for a small portion of patients, so around 15 to 20%, depends a little bit on the indication. And so that means there's still quite a huge gap, a high unmet need that we try to address with our technology and with our compounds. And there are many reasons why we still have, around 80% of unmet need. One reason, which is here listed on this slide, number 1, is actually the lack of new targets for cancer therapy. Because when you look at all the companies, basically they work all on the same handful of targets with different compounds, whether it's cellular approaches or bispecific antibodies or whatever it is. And we try to expand this universe, and that's why we have developed a platform which is called FIRST. And this is a very simple cartoon outlining the technology. So number 1, differentiating factor actually for us is that we start directly from patient material. So we have a close collaboration with the hospital in Lund, such that we have access to fresh patient material on a regular basis, and that is used directly in our screening. That means we screen that against our human antibody library, and then we identify specific binders out of that library against the material of interest. And then before we even identify the target, we test those antibodies functionally in a number of different animal models, and would only focus on those that show strong therapeutic effects in at least a handful of different animal models. And for those antibodies, we also identify the target. Which means that at the end of this process, we end up with preclinically validated targets and antibodies. And this platform we have used in those collaborations that I mentioned on my previous slide, and we also have used to build the portfolio, which is outlined here on this slide. And when you first look on the left-hand side, you can see the speed. 2018, 1 program. By the end of last year, we had 5 programs. Second half of this year, we'll have 6 programs, all generated in-house. And that is only possible because we have all these capabilities that I mentioned on my earlier slide. Then regarding those programs that you see here, so we're currently focusing on 3 targets. One is Fc-gamma-R2b, which is a very important inhibitory receptor on the cells of the innate immune system. So when you look at the immune system, it has 2 parts, the innate and the adaptive. And most of the approaches that you see currently are focused on the adaptive. And that is one of the few approaches regarding the innate immune system. And there we have 2 different antibodies, 1206 and 1607, in 3 different clinical trials. And I will come back to that later in more detail. You will see on the right-hand side CASI, so the lead program we already have partnered for China, Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan. And otherwise, all the other programs are unpartnered. Then on the adaptive side, we are focusing on 2 targets, TNF receptor 2 as well as CTLA4. TNF receptor 2 is a very interesting, hot and upcoming target. When we started the work, we were basically one of the few. Now there's quite some competition, big pharma and big biotech, but we're still leading the pack, so to speak. And there we have 2 programs, 1808, which is our lead compound, and I'll come back to that later. And then 1910, which will be our program number 6 that will go into the clinic later this year. Then we also have a proprietary program around CTLA4, which is also quite interesting. So you might know that there's an antibody in the clinic called ipilimumab, and which is already clinically validated and work. But it has toxicity issues, and that's why we try to identify a new antibody binding to a different epitope on CTLA4. And this is our proprietary antibody, which is nicely differentiated from ipilimumab. And we currently develop it in collaboration with Transgene in a 50-50 joint venture, combining it with their oncolytic virus system. And I will come back to that later also in more detail. So then very briefly on 1206, our lead program. There we're focusing on patients in non-Hodgkin lymphoma that have relapsed or do not respond anymore to the standard of care. We have done the dose escalation and currently in dose expansion, and we have achieved already proof of concept for that compound. And the data is summarized here on this slide. So this is out of 15 patients that could be evaluated, where we saw 3 partial responses, 4 complete responses. And I think the interesting thing here is really, first of all, it's a very good overall response rate. But I think what is really interesting that we see long-lasting complete responses, because that's what the regulatory authorities want. So we have now patients that are in complete response since 2 years after the end of the study, which means almost 3 years. Not seeing any other treatment, so basically healed, or as we call it, long-lasting complete response. What we have done, so here what you see the data is from our IV. We have also developed a sub-Q variant of this antibody, and this is currently in dose escalation. And today we had a press release on the IV data that was here on this slide, because we're presenting this on a big meeting around non-Hodgkin lymphoma in Lugano. And the sub-Q data, which is currently still in dose escalation, will be available before the summer, so this is ongoing. So in summary, it's a very compelling scientific rationale. First in class, addresses a high unmet need, and we see those long-lasting responses, which is actually unusual because you have sometimes good overall response, but if you look at it over time, they basically wean off and become less and less. In our case, it's not happening, so it's really looking quite promising. Then we developed this antibody also in solid cancer, where we focus on patients who do not respond anymore to checkpoint inhibitors. There we're still in dose escalation, so earlier compared to the other trial. But we have seen already quite some interesting responses. So we saw 4 patients that have received at least 2 lines or 3 lines of standard of care and did not respond anymore, responding again, which I think is a very important thing, because those patients were at the end of their treatment and there was no other alternative, and we could provide that with 1206 in combination with Keytruda. We also had a press release regarding those data just a couple of days ago. And the next step there will be to determine the dose for the phase 2 part, as well as also to introduce the sub-Q that I already have mentioned that will happen also before the summer. Then switching gears, that's our second anti-Fc gamma 2b antibody 1607. The main difference is really that this is not active regarding Fc receptors, so has a completely different mode of action than 1206. It's currently in clinical development in combination with trastuzumab, focusing on solid cancers that are HER positive. Recruitment is going very well, and the data will be available during the second half of this year. Then moving to TNF receptor 2, and 1808 is our lead, which had a very, very strong preclinical profile, which is summarized here. So it's first in class and really showed nice effect in animals in all kind of tumor models, cold as well as inflamed. And we are now currently developing this for all comers, so at least in the dose escalation. And the clinical trial design is shown on the next slide. So we have almost finished the dose escalation for the single agent, and that data will be also provided before the summer. And in parallel, we're moving also in collaboration with Merck. And whenever you see that we use Keytruda, this is under supply agreements that we have with Merck, but Merck doesn't have any rights. So they just provide us the compound for free. And the combination here is also running in parallel, and that data set will be available during the second half of this year. So this trial is running very well, very, very fast. No side effects besides that we already have seen, and that's summarized here. Some first signs of efficacy for the single agent. And also keep in mind what we're getting are patients that are at the end of their treatment. So that means they have seen whatever is the standard of care and do not respond anymore. And if you see responses there, this is actually something very exciting. So I mentioned already when the data sets will be available, and otherwise these trials are running very well. Then at the end, BT-001, which is our collaboration with Transgene. As I said, it's a 50-50 joint venture. And basically what we have done, we have cloned our anti-CTLA-4 in their oncolytic virus system. And what we could show preclinically and also in the clinic is that we can really have a very specific expression of anti-CTLA-4 only in the solid tumor environment, but no systemic expression. And that's exactly what we wanted, because we wanted to focus the activity of anti-CTLA-4 only where it is needed. And that seems to work. So we have finished the first part of the clinical development that you see here. And we also summarized the data, and now we're almost ready to go into the second part. And that will happen during the second half of this year, and that will be the combination with Keytruda. Regarding the data that we have seen for the dose escalation, so it was safe, no problems there. We saw also first responses in a couple of tumor patients, so very encouraging again. And there was no objection from the safety committee to really move ahead with the combination with Keytruda. So that will happen after the summer. Then at the end, very briefly, the key milestones for this year. So before the summer, we'll have the sub-Q data for 1206. We'll start the sub-Q for 1206 in combination with pembrolizumab. We'll have the first data set for 1808 single agent. And then after the summer, so basically second half of this year, will be the combination study will kick off for BT-001 with Keytruda. And then we have two further data sets. One is for 1808 in combination with pembrolizumab, and the other one, 1607, in combination with trastuzumab. And then, as I mentioned, we will start also our program number 6, which is 1910, which is our second anti-TNF receptor 2 program. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. If I may ask you, Martin, what differentiates your company from other biotech companies? Mm-hmm. What makes you special if you compare?
Yeah, so I think number one, the high integration that we have that I mentioned on my first slide. This is really something unique for European biotech, because normally you don't have the money to build this kind of integration. So Bioinvent did this over all those years. The company is available. And that means discovery, targets and antibodies, manufacturing, and clinical development. That's one thing. And then number two, I would say the portfolio approach that we have now with 6 programs soon. That all have been generated in-house, 6 programs, 5 different compounds, I should say, because we have 1 program and 2 different trials. This is also quite unique. And then I think the third thing, if you allow me, is the investor base that we have. So we have a very strong international investor base, which helped us to raise funds that really transformed the company.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that makes you different, because you mentioned that you have a lot of cash on hand, and in this market that is around us for the time being, makes it hard for many companies to actually approach the market and to ask for more funds.
Exactly. And when I was waiting for my presentation, I looked into a report about Nordic companies, and Bioinvent was one of the companies listed in the strong category. Most of them are in the danger category for that reason that you just have mentioned.
One of the last slides that you showed us here summarized when you will have some, what should I say, more readouts from different phases. And you are in early clinical stage. So when do you foresee that you have more mature clinical results that makes you a bit more safe, if I may use that word?
Yeah. I think from my perspective, and I'll come back to your question in a sec, we already have seen actually quite encouraging results, but you're absolutely right, it's still early data. But normally when you do phase 1 clinical trials, what you normally do is look for safety.
Yeah.
We have seen it safe. In addition, we also see efficacy, especially in our lead program where we really had a strong response. So I think there we already established that the drug is working. But I'm a conservative person, so I also prefer to see this in the larger patient populations, and that will happen next year, basically.
Next year?
Yeah. So I think by the second half of next year, we should have our lead program with some interesting dose expansion data. Yeah. And obviously, since we are running open label trials and what we have done over the last couple of weeks and months, whenever we see a meaningful collection of patients that show some interesting results, we share it. So there will be some sharing on the way. But really to have a substantial data set second half of next year.
Second half of next year?
Yeah.
Okay. You have a number of partners already. Which is encouraging, because I think many of your competitors are looking for partners, but you have succeeded in getting those. How is the collaboration with those? Do they differ from one partner to the other, or do they contribute with the same sort of input, or does it vary from project to project?
There are, of course, different company cultures, but I would say, in principle, if a company invests, let's say, around like Exelixis $25 million upfront, they're very cooperative because they spend a lot of money and they want to make sure that the collaboration that we're running is successful. And Exelixis is one example, as I already mentioned, it's still at its early phases. But with those other companies, Daiichi, Mitsubishi, Takeda, and Bayer, so we're either in phase 1 or phase 2. So getting now to interesting stages of those programs. And first of all, this is, of course, a good validation of our platform. That not only we take antibodies from our platform and develop it, it's also done by those partners. And then you never know, there could be also some interesting revenues. Obviously, the structure of those deals is always the same. There's some upfront, there's FTE coverage at the beginning, milestone during clinical development, milestone during commercialization, and royalties at the end, tiered royalties. So could be quite interesting for the company. But of course, it takes time. So I was running, my previous company was Afitec. It was a Norwegian private biotech company that we took public. And now they have a program with Roche, which is a product. Okay. And I left that company more than 10 years ago. So it takes time.
Yes, it does. What about competitors? Are there competitors following what you are establishing, or are you alone in some of the projects, and some you have more fierce competition?
Yeah, so of course there's the whole spectrum. So I think from a platform perspective, we're unique. So the first platform that I briefly explained is unique for Bioinvent, and it's actually a very interesting tool in order to generate new potential therapeutic targets. And we're currently using that in oncology, but it could be also used in autoimmune diseases and inflammation. And then when you go program by program, I would say the biggest competition is probably around our lead, and that's just because of the space, non-Hodgkin lymphoma. There's a lot of competition ongoing there. But we have a very unique positioning, because what is quite interesting, what we learned, and that became recently also supported, so we got an investment by the Leukemia Lymphoma Society early this year. And they basically found us because they think that we have this unique positioning, which means anti-CD20 rituximab will remain the backbone of the therapy for the next 10, probably to 15 years. And if you then have something that you can just add on in order to make it work better or work again, because everybody who receives anti-CD20 based therapy will become resistant at some time point. And when you can revert that, I think that is super unique, very interesting, since we have a very safe profile. Then the other program that I would like to mention, where is now, and I mentioned it already during the presentation, is around the TNF receptor 2, because this is probably one of the new upcoming checkpoint that you can target. And when we started this, we were almost alone. So there was just one competitor in Boston.
One competitor,
yeah, one,
at the very beginning.
At the very beginning. Now it's Novartis, it's Beijing, and a couple of other Chinese companies.
And that must be a proof that you are
correct
in the right.
But we are in the lead.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
We still, and especially we have both flavors that you could use against TNF receptor 2, whereas our competitors have either one or the other.
Okay.
So we are there in a comfortable position. Yeah.
Must be. Then you're in a unique position, I would
absolutely,
say.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. As an investor following the company, or if an investor not already a shareholder, can you give us a few reasons why one should become a shareholder as of now and follow you into the future?
Yeah, so as of now, I think it's even more interesting since the whole market is very depressed. So all the share prices are down. Mm-hmm. So I think now is actually a unique opportunity to get into the company at a very reasonable price. Mm-hmm. And since the news flow that is coming will drive the share price, I'm pretty sure. And so far we only have seen positive results. And we hope that to continue, and especially the next year. And I think then we see a sharp rise of the share price.
Yeah, and like you said here earlier during our conversation, second half of 2024, one will have a possibility to see some good milestones being fulfilled.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. Is there anything else you would like us to bring along from today? Something that you would like us to keep not in the back of our head, but in the front of our head?
Yeah, so I think Bioinvent is really one of the most exciting companies, not only in the Nordics, but in Europe. So my background obviously is, I'm from Germany originally, and I have run companies in Ireland, in Norway, and Denmark. I worked in the US. And I was approached by Bioinvent 5 years ago. So I joined the company in 2018. And that caught my eye. So it was really forefront science, because that's the other thing that I couldn't mention in my short presentation. We have to have good science and good rationale. Otherwise, there's not a good basis and starting point. And then the level of integration, all the technical capabilities that the company has, is something really exciting. And that's why I joined, because I thought that's something that I can work with.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for a good presentation, and good luck.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.